going, everyone? Tim here, Tier D Adventures. Hope everyone's all well out there. As always, thanks for tuning in. Much appreciated. So we'll take a little deeper dive into our SORRCA Scale Nationals prep videos. Today, we're going to go over Class 1. Go over the SORRCA rules for Class 1. Try to give a visual example as best I can. Then talk a little bit about the point system and go over the scale points that I currently have in my Class 1. So first up, I have the PDF pulled up here, so I'm just gonna kind of scroll through everything and start looking at the rules and everything. Like I mentioned in the previous video, there is a general vehicle details. Now this applies throughout the classes, so we'll just touch a little bit on about this. I'm not gonna go over every single one. Starting off, obviously this is scale RC. So the goal is to, try to be as scale as possible. Vehicles and accessories and everything must resemble one-to-one, and all that depends on the judges. They can make that call if need be, if there's any questionable stuff. So first up, you must run a rail chassis in Class 1 and 2. Class 3 can run a tube chassis, but it must follow all C3 chassis specs. A true rail chassis, no twin vertical plates or anything like that. So, we have right here just a rail chassis. This is a G-Speed V1C1. Next up here, multi-axle vehicles are allowed in all classes and may use more than one front steering axle. Front axles, anything up in front of the center line of the vehicle. So you can have multiple front steer, but for rear steer, that is only allowed in C3. Rear steer and dig is only allowed in modified C3. No MOA of any kind. All motors, transmissions, and other electronics must be chassis mounted or frame mounted. Your axles must be driven by one transmission or a transfer case and a minimum of 2 drive shafts, with, again, a couple exceptions. No separate throttle control of drive shafts or axles. And it goes on to wheels. No wheels larger than 2.2. So you can run 2.2 size wheels in any class. Cannot be bigger than that. No short course wheels, no split diameter wheels, anything like that. Next one here. Wheels must resemble a one-to-one type wheel. No translucent, clear materials, exposed foams, or front standoff constructions are not legal in any class. So you've seen before on the previous channel, I had said those clear boom race wheels. Those are not legal. No clear, and they must resemble one-to-one style. Here's the next one. No bolt-on or stick-on external axle or knuckle weights of any kind. So I will always see a lot of people ask questions about that. So people are like, well, does that mean I can't run my brass knuckles or something like that? No. If it truly serves a purpose, like right here, I do have brass knuckles. That knuckle serves its purpose. It is the steering knuckle. It is talking like true, you can Google search it. There are true things that are bolt-on weights that would clamp over like the axle housing itself, or simply just like we're zip tying a piece of metal for weight here in the front, just somewhere. If it is strictly for weight purposes and does not actually serve a functional purpose on the vehicle, that is not allowed. Any functional recovery tools you want to use during the course, you have to have it on your truck. So tow strap, shoestring, anything like that that you might need during the course as recovery, it has to be on the truck. You can't carry it on you. Winching can be performed off natural objects, other vehicles, or sticks supplied by the course builder. Winching off a person, such as their shoe or hand, is not allowed. So must be off something, natural terrain, winch stick, or something specifically they have at that course. Next one up here. All vehicles must have motor, transmission, and electronics covered and hidden when viewed from the top and sides. Batteries must be chassis mounted and should be hidden from view. So make sure all your electronics, everything's covered up. No, so even if, say, like you have a body like this and let's say you don't have an interior for it, you at least need to put a cover in here so they cannot see the electronics. Next up, exposed brass and bronze parts, says here, should be painted for scale appearance, but it is not required. Winches are highly recommended and waterproofing is highly recommended. So that is the gist of it for the general rules and guidelines. Moving on down, next up here is tires. It's going to talk about tires should be scale appearing, and if any questionable tires are brought to view, that is at the judge's discretion or event host. Then it's going to talk about tire modifications. For each class has their own list there. So for Class 1, no external tire modification is allowed. You can't do anything to your tire other than how they come out of the package. You cannot cut any of the grooves out. You cannot add any extra siping, anything like that. And next, under that, it'll go over the tire band list, which, yes, there is a tire band list, and it is mostly because they are not scale appearing tires, and also that some of those tires do perform exceptionally well. So again, like I mentioned previously, Class 1's like street vehicle. It's like your daily driver. You know, you could take it you drive it every day, and you can on the weekend take it down, hit some light trails, some out crawling, and go back to work and not worry about it. You know, no aggressive cutting, no huge oversized tires, stuff like that. So first up here, Class 1 requirements. So gates for a SORRCA-based event, the minimum gate width for Class 1 is 11 inches. So all your gates will be a minimum of 11 inches. So also, when you're building Class 1, you know, always keep that gate width in mind. So you don't want to go too wide where you're cutting it close on every gate. For the checklist and requirements for Class 1, vehicles must have a chassis mounted servo for Class 1. So chassis mounted servo, Class 1, check. Next, vehicles must have a windshield that fills the entire frame. So it is talking right here. It must have a windshield and it must fill the entire frame all the way around. Check. Bumpers. Full width bumpers are required front and rear of the vehicle. Bumpers that are molded into the body do qualify. A rear bumper is not required on a flatbed, but can be added for additional scale points. Bumpers must be as wide as the widest part of the windshield. So it is talking right here, widest part of the windshield. So right here on this body, it is right here at the bottom. And bumpers, both front and rear, are that wide. So all good there, check. Wheelbase. Wheels must be aligned within the center of the body wheel wells within plus or minus ½ an inch total combined. So your wheelbase right here, boom to boom, must be within the center part of the wheel wells, and you have ½ an inch total front and rear. So there is a little leeway if you want to, you know, extend the rear out just a little bit or push the front forward just a little bit. Wherever it is with your body, find your center line of your wheels and then your hubs and measure. Make sure you have no more than ½ an inch. Onto body requirements. Only mild trimming is allowed, such as removing flares, trim, molding, and a hardtop. A vehicle's stock bumper may be replaced with a chassis mounted bumper, and the material may be removed in front of the front wheel up to the stock bumper height. If the vehicle does not have a stock bumper, this area can be trimmed to the lowest light or grill bezel. Material behind the rear wheel well may be trimmed up to the bottom of the tailgate. An interior is required if the top is removed. Bodies should be mounted in a realistic position in relation to the chassis, like a 1-to-1 would be. Any removal, bending of material behind the front wheel well, except trim or molding, is considered a boat side. Bobbing the truck bed is allowed. Now, here's to when I was talking about stretching the wheelbase there. Tires cannot extend beyond the body's bumpers or the rear of any truck bed. Any stingers, fair leads, shackles, bolts, etc. are not considered part of the bumper when determining this. So, said you can't go too far. You can't have your tires sticking out past the body in either direction. So, back to that. So, mild trimming. So, like right here, when it said up to the bottom of the grill bezel headlight. So, right here, that's as high up as I can trim it right there. And I did go ahead and trim it all the way around. And here in the rear, this bed is bobbed already. So, normally the bed would probably be about here. This is the RC 4-wheel drive bob bed, so it came shorter anyway. So boom, right there. And this material behind the wheel has been removed now up to the tailgate there. So good there as far as trimming. Now when it talks about flares and stuff, like if you have the narrow enough wheelbase and everything, you could cut these flares all the way off. I have flared mine out a little bit more. Next up, tires. 106 millimeters or 4.19 is the max tire size, including spares. And yes, it is a pretty significantly small tire compared to something we would run in like a Class 2, a typical 4.75 tire. No external tire modification is allowed, like I mentioned earlier, and the tread cannot extend past the wheel wells more than half of the tread width. Flares can be used to reach the minimum spec. So right here, what it's talking about is tire coverage. Making sure right here covers at least 50% of the tire. And reason for flaring that is to meet that spec. Now, the Team Garage Hack wheels obviously helped. I probably didn't need to actually flare this to get that, but I just wanted to make sure. So right there, almost all that tire coverage, and we're good to go there. Next up here, we're going to talk a little bit about the chassis. Vehicle must run a full-length rail chassis. The rail chassis must be as long as the vehicle's wheelbase, with a couple exceptions. Truggies are not allowed. Flatbeds with full-length rail chassis are allowed. For flatbed, the bed must be as wide as the cab up to the point that the rear tires end, and must be at least 2/3 width of the cab at its nearest. Cab only is not allowed. So what it's talking about there on as far as flatbed, you can run a flatbed, and it does have to go all the way back, but the flatbed has to be as wide as the cab until you get past the rear tires, and then you can narrow it in. But then when you narrow it in, it still has to be at least 2/3 width, its widest point. And the last one here in chassis. Chassis must have metal frame rails with a maximum vertical rise of 2 inches and 0 sporty lean. Must be a single rail per side. However, adjustable length chassis like the Cinder are Class 1 legal, and probably the Axial, the SX-10-3 now. All chassis must have a skid plate that is parallel to the rockers. If present, shock hoops must be bolted, brazed, or welded to the chassis. Fully designated Class 1 chassis, they will be in a metal because it has to be an alloy of some sort. And the shock towers, they either need to be bolted like this, or if you're fancy, can braze them or weld them up. And then the last part here on Class 1, the following modifications are prohibited. For Class 1, no boat sides, no dovetailing, and no narrowing of the body. And narrowing of the body is like cutting, say, this section, cutting an inch out of the middle and squishing it together. That is not allowed. No pinching, dovetailing, and no boat sides. So needs to stay stock as possible and street legal as you would one-to-one like a daily driver. That's the gist of Class 1 there. And I said Class 1 is the most scale, and it does have the most aggressive or more in-depth rule set. Class 1's quickly becoming my favorite class to drive and compete in. I really enjoy Class 1 on that level of it. Now, I do obviously enjoy the capabilities of my Class 2 and 3 trucks. They are far superior than my Class 1, but I really enjoy driving the Class 1. The small tires and stuff, I think, adds that good challenge, and it's the building of Class 1. I really loved the build here, making sure all the rules, making sure all that's good, and staying intact there. Class 1, and I'm pretty proud of my little Class 1 here. It does really, really well. I like it a lot. As long as I can drive as good as the truck is built, it can usually mean for a pretty good day. That is the Class 1 rules and stuff there. So now let's get down here into the point system. Touch a little bit based on that in some previous videos. Your scale points go towards your finishes, and I'll read a little bit here. So scale points are to be awarded at 50% of the vehicle's total, rounded down if necessary, for an average 10-gate course. So just for the ease of math here, we're going to try to make this a little simple. We have a comp, we have 2 courses, and so we can take 50% of each course. So let's say I finished both courses. Let's say I finished course 1 at straight 0. So then I take the 50% of my vehicle's scale points. So from -60, that becomes -30. So then I take the -30, add that to my 0. So my score for course 1 is -30. I finish the second course, also finish at 0. And then I take, again, 50% of my scale points. So again, I take that -30 to 0. So -30 and -30. So my total score for both those classes would be -60. So again, scale points come into big play. At larger events like this, pointed out trucks are at the top. So scale points are very, very important. You need to make sure you can get all of them, and we'll see just how close I am here to getting all of those points. I do kind of have everything pre-edited up here, filling out my Team Garage Tech sheet for this weekend. What gives you points? So first up here, it's going to start with the body section. So hard body. I have a full body hard body, so I will be awarded -12 points for that. Next up here is a drop bed. This body does have a drop bed that qualifies and meets specifications, so I will be awarded -3 points for that. Next up would be custom built hard bodies. That's a no-go for me. Next up, inner fenders. I do not have inner fenders on this vehicle. Next up is bed. 2-bed or flat bed. They have their own, and in here it does give descriptions for each one, what truly makes it qualifying. Like right here, it touches over the Class 1 rule again, stuff like that. I do not have a tube or flatbed. Next up here, headache rack or roll bar. I do have a roll bar. With that being metal, I'm actually going to be awarded more points because there are sections in here where you gain more points for the material being metal versus plastic, and that is one of them. So metal, it's -2. If it was plastic, it would be -1. Again, that's just more ways to get points. There are points and rules for truggies and two-frame systems. I do not have any of that there. There's a section for rigid, flat, metal, plastic body panels. I do not have any of that. Section for interior and exo cages. I do not have any of that fancy stuff. I'm just not that talented to try to build any of that stuff. If you are, or that is something that you have and are considering, go through. There are, within the points, it gives you a brief description and what truly requires to get the points for those. Next up, tube and plate accessories. So first up in this section are sliders. And it does talk about, again, rules on the sliders. Must be within, mounted on both sides, must be within ½ inch at each wheel well or to the back of the cab on trucks. Key part here with sliders, must be mechanically fastened, welded, or brazed to the chassis or the hard body. So I do have metal sliders on both sides. They do meet the width requirements and they are mechanically fastened to the body. So I would gain -3 points for them being metal. Next up, bumpers. Must be chassis mounted and separate from the body. So I do have a front metal bumper and a rear metal bumper. So that would be -3 points for each of those. Next up, stinger or grill guard. We do have a stinger on here, so that is an additional -1 point. Fabricated 3D shock mounts. I do not have that on this chassis. Roof rack or light bar. You only receive points for either a roof rack or a light bar, so choose. So I have on here, I do have a carbon fiber roof rack, so that would count as plastic, so that would be -1. If it was metal, it would be -2, and if a light bar, it would be -1. Light bars must be mounted above the windshield or on top of the roof roll bar and a minimum width of 3½ inches. So next up is interior. Not a lot of people like some of these simple, bare bones interiors, but they technically work and gain the points. So first up here, we'll start with full interior. A full interior must include all of these 3D pieces: a seat, a dash, a steering wheel, and complete floor. The interior must be deep enough for a scale figure from the knees up. An additional -2 points for handmade and custom interiors can be awarded. Absolutely no cutting and re-gluing of pre-molded Lexan styrene interiors to gain additional custom points. So it's like saying you take, say, a bomber interior and you cut it and you re-glue it and assemble it. That does not count as a handmade scratch interior. Generally, your handmade interiors are going to be made out of styrene, foam, some very small thin aluminum or like sheet metal. 3D printed interiors, to the best of my knowledge, do not count as handmade. They count as molded, or at least that's the answer I got the last time I asked. I could be totally wrong, and that may be something they're addressing in rules for the next upcoming year. I know that's been 3D printed parts, has raised a lot of questions as far as certain things on here. Don't necessarily take my word for it. Check on a SORRCA page or your event organizer to see how they handle that or how they judge that. Mine here is pretty simple. I just took some styrene, cut, glued some stuff together, laid down a floor, made a couple seats, threw some fabric over the seats. So I do have separate. My dash is separate. Steering wheel is in there. I do have a complete floor. I do have 2 seats, and I do in fact have a driver in there. And the next up here would be an SUV cargo area. Now this also applies to full interior. So an SUV, you know, that back half here, like the 4Runner, that area isn't a bed. That is a cargo area. That is technically still considered part of the inside. For your full interior points, if you're going for custom made, that entire area must be complete from the dash to your cargo area. That all needs to be one complete piece or completely handmade to gain that point. You could gain the cargo area point if it was separate, but then you would lose your handmade custom points. I do have a full 3D interior with 2 seats, so that is -4 points. And then since it is a handmade interior, I will gain an additional -2. So -6 for that interior there. And next up here, talking about full interior, drivers and passengers. I do have a knees up figure here, and that will award me -3 points. Figures must be human. Scale size adult figures. Complete figures must be a minimum of 5.5 inches tall, and all partial figures shall be of similar scale to a complete figure. Any interior that is vacuum formed to include driver figures will receive interior cover points only. So similar to your actual bomber interior. More on interior cover is any interior that does not meet the full interior requirements. So a bomber interior, gatekeeper interior, some of the cheaper pre-molded Lexan interiors, those just count as interior covers. A driver will receive an additional -1 and no points for passenger. So no matter how big your driver is in a not full interior, you only receive -1 for your driver. Next up here, moving down on to more points. Suspension, drivetrain, and steering. So next thing you can gain points for are leaf springs. I do not have any leaf springs on here, but leaf springs do add up pretty quickly. Also, multiple driven axles. Standard issue 2 axle here, so no extra points there. Chassis mounted servo. I do have a front chassis mounted servo, so that is worth -5 points. A functioning transfer case. Must be chassis mounted, have its own gears that split the power between the front and rear axles. A T-case points must include these 3 items: a motor, a geared transmission, and a transfer case. We do have a transfer case set up here. We have the transfer case from Team Garage Check and a Ford motor mount from In the Works RC. So we meet all those guidelines. So for the functioning transfer case, we will gain -4 points for that. Next up, 3D engine. I do not have a 3D engine on my class 1, but I do have one in another one. Must be in a reasonable location and appear to be powering the drivetrain of the vehicle. It is pretty basic. Definitely, as far as 3D engine goes, getting points, definitely check with the event organizer as far as how deep they want to go in the 3D engine, because they do make the final call on that. Next up, accessories. This is where non-functional and functional come into play. So for non-functional scale items, you can earn -6 points for them. So you can have 6 non-functional items, and each of them are -1 only. Non-functional are items that are not functional, but you would see on a trail truck. A couple examples it does list in here. Fuel cell, exhaust, jerry can, hubs on the wheels, disc brakes, steering stabilizer, mirrors, wipers, antenna, license plates, etc., etc. So 6. So what do we got here as far as our 6 non-functional? So we have wipers up here in the front. So there's 1. We have a license plate for 2. We have an axe for 3. We have an ammo can for 4. We have a med kit for 5 and a fire extinguisher for 6. And I actually do have just a couple extras in there, but I do have my 6 items, and I do record which 6 I am talking about on the tech sheet. Next up are functional items. You can have a maximum of -8 for your functional section, -1 each unless otherwise noted. So functional items that are found on a trail vehicle. Some examples: tow straps, D-rings, pull pals, send ladders, hitch, opening doors, hoods, a few others. Next up, headlights and tail lights. Functioning. They must function at the tech table. 2 headlights, 2 tail lights. Together, we give you -2. Winch, electric powered winches. You can have -2 for a front winch and -2 for a rear winch as well if you do have a second winch on there. For my 8, I have a servo winch here in the front for 2. I have a fair lead for 3. I have D-rings here for 4. I have a hitch for 5. I have sand ladders for 6. I have a snatch block for 7. And I do have a strap in here for 8. So all 8 points there. Next up, spare tire. You can gain points for that. Must remain a functional item mounted to a rim. Must still be within a 1/4 inch width and height of the drive tires. So the tires that are actually on your car. So for easy math, let's say you have a 4.75 tall tire. The smallest tire you can have as a spare is a 4.5 tire. So again, keep that in mind. Adding up everything, going through all the points here, puts my total for my class 1 truck at -60, which is right on the money for the maximum amount of scale points allowed in that class. And just in time to get some good comping in this weekend in Denver at the Team Garage Check Clubhouse. Super excited for that. If you are out that way or plan on going, love to meet everybody. It's going to be super awesome. It's going to be a super fantastic weekend, and I'm really, really excited for that. In the meantime, hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel down below. Any comments, questions, suggestions, as always, put them down below. Overall, hope that helps you get a little more in-depth on class 1. Hopefully a little bit of the visual examples helped. Like I said, there are some things There are a lot of stuff in there, especially in the points. It does go into more details on the rules, what's specifically required for those things, but also going over some of those general guidelines and the specs. Just tell you, when you see class 1s like this, why are they like this? Why are all this class 1 chassis metal? Because they have to be metal. Why is there no sporty lean? Because we can't have any sporty lean. So that's going to wrap this one up. Next up, we'll be going over class 2 and then class 3, and then we'll start getting some drive time videos in. Unless weather lets me get drive time videos in first, then we'll get some drive time videos in. So in the meantime, as always, everyone have a great one out there. Thanks for stopping by, and crawl on.